The NBA offseason is always a spectacle with unpredictable twists and turns. Some teams make great moves, while some make moves that leave you scratching your head. That's why in this video, I'm going to assess every NBA team's 2020 offseason trades, signings, and draft choices, and assign them each a letter grade. First up is the Atlanta Hawks, who deserve an A+. They were big winners this offseason, signing Danilo Gallinari, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and Rajon Rondo. They also got their guy Onyeka Okongwu in the draft, whose versatility on the defensive end reminds me of a young Bam Adebayo. Atlanta lost some role players, but considering the fact that they had the fourth worst record in the NBA last year, they won't lose sleep over players like Dwayne Dedmon. With these moves, I could definitely see them making the playoffs, and I think they're a lock for the expanded play-in tournament the NBA is introducing this upcoming season. Next is the Boston Celtics, who deserve a C+. The Celtics yet again lost a max player to a rival Eastern Conference team. With Hayward departing for Charlotte, the Celtics lose tremendous depth at the forward positions, unless they expect Grant Williams or Aaron Nesmith to be real contributors this year. I like the signing of Tristan Thompson, who definitely fills a need for rim protection and rebounding, and I like their rookies Nesmith and Pritchard. Also, they re-signed my boy Tremont Waters, who's from my hometown, so I definitely gotta shout him out. Considering the fact that they could have gotten Miles Turner in return for a Gordon Hayward sign-in trade, but they tried to get more in return, which gave Charlotte an opportunity to swoop in and sign him for more money, the Celtics totally flopped here. I would have loved Miles Turner in their starting lineup, but they got nothing in return, which was ultimately a disappointment. Next up is the Brooklyn Nets, who get a B+. The Nets took care of their most important free agent, Joe Harris, who should be an integral part of their contending team. Getting Landry Shamet for their first-round pick was a great move, and I like the signing of Jeff Green and the trade for Bruce Brown, who both offer some defensive depth for a team that will need all the help they can get on that end of the floor. Overall, they made some good moves, but not enough for an A-level offseason. After Brooklyn is the Charlotte Hornets, who get a C+. The Hornets swung big by signing Gordon Hayward to a massive 4-year, $120 million deal. This was clearly an overpay, not to mention the fact that they had to waive and stretch Nicholas Batum's contract, which will be dead money on the books for the next few years. But considering the fact that the Celtics and Pacers were both offering Hayward over $100 million, the extra $5 million per year on average was worth picking him up, especially since Charlotte is not a free agency destination. I like them drafting LaMelo Ball at number 3, and whether he becomes a superstar or not, I know I'm definitely tuning in. Next is the Chicago Bulls, who deserve a C. The Bulls didn't make any drastic moves this offseason, and a split with Chris Dunn was definitely expected. The Bulls surprised everyone when they took Patrick Williams at number 4 in the draft, but considering the fact that one of his player comparisons is Jaylen Brown, and how the overall reaction was very similar when Brown was drafted, I'm very intrigued and I'm rooting for Williams. The Bulls' offseason was the epitome of average. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, who deserve a C+. The Cavs, like the Bulls, did not have a very exciting offseason. However, I like the Cavs' moves a little better. Isaac Okoro is projected to be a great defender in the NBA, and if he can develop his offensive game and improve his jump shot, he will be a prototypical 3-and-D player, which every NBA team needs. Losing Tristan Thompson isn't the end of the world, as he definitely wanted out, but I like how the Cavs replaced his rim protection and athleticism with JaVale McGee. They also made the right decision not trading for Russell Westbrook, who shouldn't line up with their goals. Again, a little above average for their offseason. The Dallas Mavericks are up next with an A-. The loss of Seth Curry is one that will definitely be felt on the offensive end, but considering they had the highest offensive rating of all time last year, they can afford to lose some on that end if it means bolstering their defense. They did so by adding Josh Richardson and James Johnson, who also add an edge, veteran presence, and a little shooting to the team. Trey Burke played great against the Clippers in the first round last playoffs, so re-signing him was a great move. I also love their rookie class with Josh Green, Tyrell Terry, and Tyler Bay. Green will likely be a contributor this season, and Tyrell Terry looks like he could be a scary good offensive player if he continues to develop. Great offseason for Dallas. Next is the Denver Nuggets with a D+. Re-signing Paul Millsap was a good move, along with adding JaMychal Green. I also think that RJ Hampton was a great value pickup in the late first round. However, the Nuggets lost 3 of their best defenders in Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, and Torrey Craig. All 3 players were vital for them in the playoffs last year, defending Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Marcus Morris Sr., LeBron James, and Anthony Davis. To make the finals, you have to beat one or both of the teams in LA, and losing your best wing defenders doesn't get you any closer. Michael Porter Jr. may take a leap on the offensive end, but he is by no means a good defender at this point in his career. After Denver is the Detroit Pistons, with a D-. What is Detroit doing? The only reason I didn't give them an F is because they had a pretty good draft, picking up Killian Hayes at number 7, who I think has star potential. Saddiq Bey was also a good pick, but considering the fact that they had to give up Luke Kennard to get him is just bad. The 2 best young pieces on the Pistons last year were Christian Wood and Luke Kennard when he wasn't hurt, but now they're both gone. The Pistons overpaid for Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee, as if they forgot that Blake Griffin is still on the team. Is Grant going to play small forward? He seems like a great 4 to me. After draft night, I thought the Pistons had a clear direction, but after free agency, I was just left confused. The Golden State Warriors are next with an A-. Drafting Wiseman was a perfect move for them and a great fit at the 5. Whether he has superstar potential or not, his skill set, size, and athleticism are always going to be useful on an NBA court. I also think Nico Mannion was one of the steals of the draft, as he's already put on 12 to 15 pounds of muscle this offseason, and I think he'll show people why he was a top recruit coming out of high school, even if he is only on a 2-way contract. Kent Bazemore and Brad Wanamaker are some nice additions to their bench, with Bazemore's shooting and Wanamaker's hustle and ability as a backup point guard. I also really like them picking up Kelly Oubre, who I'm a fan of. He adds some much-needed slashing and defense to complement Curry's game, even if they had to go pretty deep into the luxury tax to get him. I feel so bad for Klay Thompson, who just tore his Achilles, and I feel like we were robbed of another year of watching the amazing Splash Bros backcourt. Next up is the Houston Rockets with a B-. I had a very hard time grading the Rockets offseason. Losing Russell Westbrook and Robert Covington is going to take a big hit, in addition to Jeff Green and Austin Rivers, who could inject the game with some high intensity and scoring off the bench. However, they did receive a first-round pick, even though it's heavily protected, in return for Russell Westbrook, and a star player in John Wall, who looks pretty good in pickup runs coming off his Achilles tear. I love the signing of Christian Wood, who was playing out of his mind before the pandemic hit, and he only just turned 25. The Rockets finally have a center, and they strategically sniped the most versatile one on the market. I also think it was smart for them to roll the dice on DeMarcus Cousins coming off an ACL tear for a non-guaranteed contract similar to the one Dwight Howard was on last year for the Lakers. Low risk, high reward. Next is the Indiana Pacers, who deserve a C. The Pacers had an average offseason this year, and made only a few minor moves. They re-signed Justin Holiday, which was a good move since he shot over 40% from 3 last season. I also like the value pick at number 54 in the draft, getting Cassius Stanley from Duke. Even if he ends up being about as good as someone like Derrick Jones Jr., who has similar athleticism and a similar game to an extent, this is a good pickup. I would have liked to see them acquire Gordon Hayward in a sign-in trade, but overall a mediocre offseason, not bad. The Los Angeles Clippers are up next with a B. The Clippers did alright this offseason, but they should have done better. They'll miss the Montrezl Harrell Lou Williams 1-2 scoring punch off the bench, but Lou can still handle his own, and Serge Ibaka is likely a better fit for the Clippers than Harrell, especially if he can play the 5. They also acquired Luke Kennard, who I think was a great pickup and can be a much-needed contributor off the bench now that Harrell is gone. Losing JaMychal Green and Landry Shamet wasn't great, and they'll miss their positional shooting. Re-signing Marcus Morris was a good move, but re-signing Reggie Jackson was a bad move. The Clippers really needed someone like Rajon Rondo or Chris Paul who could come in and be a floor general and a leader to try and recreate the Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry dynamic in Toronto. They failed to get the leader they so desperately needed due to the fact that Kawhi is not a leader, and it's unclear whether Paul George is even respected in the locker room. Next is the Los Angeles Lakers, who win big with an A+. The defending champs somehow got even better this offseason, as if steamrolling through the playoffs with a record of 16-5 wasn't enough. Last year, there were questions about where the scoring was going to come from outside of LeBron and Anthony Davis, but that won't be the case this year. The Lakers added the 6th Man of the Year, Montrezl Harrell, stealing him from their hallway rivals in LA. Harrell was not himself in the bubble, having just lost his grandmother, but if you look at his stats before the pandemic hit, he was a beast in the paint and brought tremendous energy to the Clippers' offense off the bench. The Lakers lost Rajon Rondo to the Hawks, which was unfortunate, but they acquired Dennis Schroeder, who will replace a lot of what Rondo brought to the table last year. I love this move. He shot around 39% from 3 last year and stepped up his game on the defensive end. He will likely fit in very well with LeBron, playing a Kyrie-like role to a lesser extent, attacking the defense in the half court when the Lakers need a bucket. The Lakers also added Wesley Matthews, who will provide some much-needed shooting and defense with the departure of Danny Green and Avery Bradley. Losing the rim protection and athleticism of Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee wasn't great for the Lakers, but they became even scarier on the offensive end by adding Marc Gasol. Gasol may not be the jumper that Howard and McGee are, but he can provide some floor spacing and passes out of the post that will change the Laker offense for the better. Gasol also matches up very well on the defensive end against Nikola Jokic, as he is one of the only big men in the league who is able to hold his ground when Jokic starts backing down in the post. In addition to all the newcomers, the Lakers made sure to re-up LeBron, AD, KCP, Markieff Morris, Quinn Cook, and Jared Dudley to new deals. Signing AD for 5 more years was absolutely huge for the Lakers and was the signing of the offseason, in my opinion. The Lakers will be contenders for years to come, all thanks to Rob Pelinka, Jeanie Buss, and Rich Paul. After the Lakers is the Grizzlies, who deserve a C-. The Grizzlies had a mediocre offseason, adding shooters Desmond Bane and Mario Hezonja. The only player they lost was Josh Jackson, who wasn't a major contributor last year. They re-signed DeAnthony Melton to a 4-year, $35 million deal, which seems like a bit of an overpay to me. He's a nice backup point guard, but I doubt anyone else was going to give him $9 million per year. Hopefully Ja Morant can capitalize on an outstanding rookie season and bolster the Grizzlies into a playoff spot in this tough Western Conference. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening with Jaren Jackson Jr. missing time at the beginning of this shortened season with a torn meniscus. Next is the Miami Heat, who get a B-. The Heat surprised everyone except themselves when they made the NBA Finals last season, upsetting the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics. Losing their starting power forward Jay Crowder is a big hit, along with losing Derrick Jones Jr.'s defensive versatility and supreme athleticism off the bench. However, signing Avery Bradley and Mo Harkless will fill in some of those gaps, along with Precious Achiuwa, who the Heat gladly picked up after he slid to number 20 in the draft. The Heat did well by re-signing Goran Dragic early, but gave too much to Myers Leonard, who didn't even play very many significant playoff minutes. I like how they didn't wait for Giannis Antetokounmpo and decided to sign Bam Adebayo to an extension, because to be honest, I don't really like how Giannis would even fit in Miami, hype aside. Next up is the Milwaukee Bucks, who deserve a B+. The Bucks yet again made a disappointing early exit from the playoffs, and they decided to go all in this offseason. In exchange for Eric Bledsoe, George Hill, and their entire future in draft picks, they acquired Drew Holiday, who was one of the most sought-after players available for trade after the season ended. Yes, they likely gave up too much, since Drew can leave in free agency a year from now, and Giannis hasn't signed the Supermax yet. However, with a big three of Giannis, Holiday, and Middleton, paired with Brook Lopez and Dante DiVincenzo, the Bucks are looking very scary next year. They'll miss the shooting of Hill, the defense of Bledsoe and Robin Lopez, and both with Wesley Matthews, but Augustine and Forbes are good backup guards, and Torrey Craig is a good defender. If Giannis re-signs like I expect him to, whether he does it before or after this upcoming season, this will have been a good offseason for Milwaukee. After Milwaukee is the Minnesota Timberwolves with a B-. Anytime a team adds the number 1 pick in the draft, it's hard to have a bad offseason. Anthony Edwards will likely make an impact his first year, and getting Rubio back for James Johnson was a good move, especially since he's an upgrade over Jeff Teague. I personally don't see them making the playoffs, but maybe they can sneak in the new play-in tournament as a 10 seed. Next is the New Orleans Pelicans, who get an A. Obviously, losing Drew Holiday will hurt their playoff chances for this year, and they replaced him with a guard who does a lot of the same things aside from shooting in Eric Bledsoe, but they could have done worse. Not to mention the fact that they got all of Milwaukee's future first-round picks. They made a good move by adding Steven Adams to replace Derek Favors, who left for Utah in free agency. Re-signing Brandon Ingram to a 5-year max deal is also great for them, and I like his fit next to Zion with his improved three-point shot. I'm also a fan of point guard Kyra Lewis Jr., who they picked up at number 13 in the draft, but it makes you start to question Lonzo Ball's long-term future in New Orleans. Even with all these moves, I think the lack of shooting on this roster outside of JJ Redick will leave them on the outside of the playoff picture this season. Next up is the New York Knicks with a C+. I actually don't mind this offseason for the Knicks, and by that I mean I like that they didn't make any awful moves in typical Knicks fashion. Obi Toppin was clearly their guy at number 8 in the draft, and he should have a lot to learn from Tom Thibodeau on the defensive end of the floor. They obviously did some favors for agents by signing Austin Rivers, Nerlens Noel, and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, but the Lakers have proved that these type of moves can be beneficial in the long run. I don't mind the signings of Burks and Payton, as they aren't long-term commitments, and maybe Burks can be flipped for an asset or two from a contender at the trade deadline. I think it was smart to roll the dice on Miles Powell, who was an outstanding player in college. Overall, the Knicks did surprisingly fine here, especially since they didn't completely mess up their timeline by trading for Russell Westbrook. I also see RJ Barrett being a dark horse candidate for Most Improved Player this season under Thibodeau. After New York is the Oklahoma City Thunder with an A-. Normally when a team loses players like Chris Paul, Danilo Gallinari, Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder, and Nerlens Noel, it would be considered a catastrophic off-season disaster. However, this Thunder team is the exception. They did a good job last year by exceeding expectations and getting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander some playoff experience, but now they have a clear direction. In exchange for all those players, they received 4 first-round picks, 6 second-round picks, Al Horford, George Hill, and Trevor Ariza, who can all be flipped for assets down the line, except for maybe Horford. Now the Thunder have 18 first-round picks from 2021 to 2027. They will have an awful team the year before the incredible 2021 draft class, and now Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can be the number 1 option after learning from Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder last season. Next up is the Orlando Magic, who get a C+. The Magic were in trade rumors prior to the 2020 draft, with Aaron Gordon's name being thrown around to move up into the lottery and get a top pick, but they ended up staying at 15 and selecting Cole Anthony, which I think was a great pick. Anthony was consistently at the top of his recruiting class, and the only year he struggled was last year at North Carolina, where he was not only asked to shoulder a huge offensive load for a subpar UNC squad, but he also got injured. He replaces DJ Augustine's minutes as the Magic get younger, which is definitely the path they need to stay on. The Magic have consistently been a bad to mediocre franchise without any clear plans since Dwight Howard left, but hopefully good moves like this will push them in the right direction. Next is the Philadelphia 76ers, who deserve an A. I personally think Philly did great this offseason by letting Daryl Morey do his thing to add shooting around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Al Horford was an awful fit on this team, and getting off his contract by flipping him for Danny Green and Terrence Ferguson was a great move, and they'll likely exceed the contributions made by Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III last season. Picking up Seth Curry in exchange for Josh Richardson was one of the best moves of the offseason for both teams. Seth Curry is statistically one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time, and I think he's underrated as a defender and as a player in general. He's also a perfect fit next to Simmons and Embiid. Additionally, Tyrese Maxey might be one of the steals of the draft, so look out for him in a Sixers uniform next year. After Philly is the Phoenix Suns, who deserve an A+. The Suns capitalized on an awe-inspiring 8-0 run in the bubble by adding Chris Paul and Jay Crowder, which were both amazing moves. Crowder gives them some more options at the 4 alongside Cameron Johnson and Dario Saric, who they also re-signed. Chris Paul, on the other hand, will do wonders for both Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, even if he is 35 years old. I also like them re-signing Javon Carter as a backup point guard, and I think he has a lot to learn from CP3. Of course, they'll miss Oubre, Rubio, and Baines, but what they're getting in return definitely offsets their losses. Great offseason for Phoenix, who will surely be in the playoff discussion this year. Next up is the Portland Trailblazers, who get an A+. The Blazers dealt with injuries throughout last season, but their biggest problem was actually on the defensive side of the ball. A starting lineup that includes Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, and Carmelo Anthony is threatening on the offensive end, but a joke on defense. The Blazers also seemed like they were stuck in the mud without any options to improve the roster, but they somehow managed to make a trade for Robert Covington to get rid of some of their concerns on defense. That, paired with the signing of Derrick Jones Jr. and re-signing Rodney Hood and Melo, are the makings of a great offseason. Portland looks much more formidable than they did last year. Next is the Sacramento Kings with a C+. The Kings should have had a great offseason. They somehow snagged Tyrese Haliburton after he surprisingly fell to number 12 in the draft. They re-signed De'Aaron Fox to a max extension, and they picked up Glenn Robinson III and Hassan Whiteside on cheap contracts. Unfortunately, they lost Bogdan Bogdanovic, one of their best players, for nothing. It's not like he was an unrestricted free agent and just chose to go elsewhere. The Kings actually decided to let him walk in restricted free agency. Losing a good young player like that is never a good thing, but their other moves bumped them back up to have a slightly above average offseason. After the Kings is the San Antonio Spurs, who get a C. The Spurs had an average offseason, and there isn't much to talk about here. They lost Bryn Forbes and Marco Bellinelli, but they made good selections in the draft with Devin Vassell at 11 and Trey Jones in the second round. Re-signing Jakob Poeltl was a good move, but it looks like the Spurs are stuck in mediocrity for Greg Popovich's last coaching years. Next up is the Toronto Raptors, who deserve a D+. The Raptors had a subpar offseason this time around. You always love to see an undrafted player like Fred VanVleet get paid, but I think they overpaid for him. He had some other suitors, but I don't think anyone else would have paid what the Raptors did. I'm happy for him, but the Raptors would have had a better offseason if they had made a deal under $20 million a year instead of above. In addition to that, they lost two of their three best frontcourt players in Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol for nothing. Gasol's contributions will partially be made up for by Aaron Baines, but Baines is about to turn 34, so he's not even that much younger than Gasol at age 35. Chris Boucher has potential, but it seems like that's all he's ever had outside of his great G League performances. Overall, the Raptors got worse this offseason. Next is the Utah Jazz with a B+. I really like this offseason for the Jazz. They got Donovan Mitchell to sign a 5-year max contract, meaning they got a star player to commit to playing in Utah, which isn't a free agency destination for the NBA's best players by any means. They also re-signed Jordan Clarkson, who was a very efficient spark plug off the bench for them last year, especially in the bubble. I also love them bringing back Derek Favors, whose defensive presence at the center position was clearly missed in the minutes that Rudy Gobert was off the floor last year. They did all this while only losing a couple of role players who didn't really play much. Overall, a great offseason for Utah. Lastly, we have the Washington Wizards, who get a B+. The Wizards did very well this offseason. They somehow managed to be in a position to draft Deni Avdija at number 9, who I thought was a top player in the draft. They also re-signed Davis Bertans, who is one of the best stretch fours in the league, even if they did overpay for him. In addition to those two moves, they won the Russell Westbrook-John Wall trade. John Wall hasn't played in an NBA game since late 2018, which was 6 months before Kevin Durant's last game for the Warriors. Not to mention the fact that he's coming off an Achilles tear, which has traditionally been one of the hardest injuries for athletic players like Wall to come back from. Wall also has a ridiculously big contract, and the fact that they got rid of it by adding a heavily protected first-round pick was great for them, and I haven't even mentioned what they got in return. They got Russell Westbrook, who was unhappy in Houston last year playing next to James Harden, just like Dwight Howard and Chris Paul were in years prior. He had a bad playoffs, but that was only after recovering from COVID and sustaining a hamstring injury that kept him out of half of the bubble seeding games. People seem to forget that before the pandemic hit, Westbrook was a beast. In a 36-game stretch from the months of December to March, he averaged 30 points, 8.2 rebounds, and 7 assists per game on a very efficient 49% from the field. Yes, you heard me correctly, Russell Westbrook was playing efficient basketball. The Wizards made a great move pairing him up with Bradley Beal on a team full of shooters. And that's everyone. This is my first YouTube video, so it would be greatly appreciated if you like the video and subscribe for more content like this. That's it for me, and I'll see you guys next time.